All right. Well, good morning, Julie. Thank you for joining me here. I'm so excited to be with you this morning. Thanks for being here today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, for sure. I was mentioning to you earlier, but I want everyone who may be watching to know have become a hero to me because of your impact with kids. And I'm a father of 5 kids, and I've had the privilege of starting a couple counseling ministries myself. And we have so many kid requests all the time. And so in the biblical counseling world, I would say the resources for helping kids is sparse, but obviously your name rises to the top. And so I've been following you for a long time. So I'm honored to be with you and honored to have this time. Thank you for giving it to me and telling us a little bit about you and your ministry. I want to dive right in there. If you'll just kind of tell us a little bit about you, for maybe those who aren't aware of you, haven't been following you, if they're just meeting you for the first time, tell us a little bit about you. I want to know about your family and then maybe why you got into counseling and specifically have an emphasis on working with children.
Sure. My husband Greg and I have 5 kids, and at any given moment that increases a couple of kids. We serve as foster parents. So sometimes you never quite know. It's funny, we've actually contradicted each other sometimes when we've answered how many kids we've had because we had kids in and out of the home. But we're a foster adoptive family, and we have 5 children. Both my husband and I are counselors. He's a part-time counselor and also a hospice social worker. And then I work full-time as a faculty and counselor at the Christian Counseling and Educational Foundation
Yeah,
in Glenside, Pennsylvania.
that's great.
So that's a brief
That's
overview.
great. I love it. I love it. How old are your birth kids, the kids that you have in your home or out of your home right now?
Yeah, so our kids, our youngest is 10, and then
Okay.
we've got 4 teenagers going all the way up to soon to be 19. So we're in
Okay.
the whole gamut of life from elementary to college age right now.
That's great. That's great. Good. And then you got into counseling over 15 years ago, if I'm understanding correctly. And that's always kind of been working with kids. Has that been your main emphasis the whole time?
No, actually, it hasn't. So, yeah, I've always been interested in counseling. My undergrad, my graduate work was in counseling. I grew up in a family in ministry. So I think
Okay.
always having a heart for church and
Yeah.
ministry and just counseling, one-on-one ministry particularly, was always interesting to me. And then when I moved into a position at CCEF full time doing counseling, I actually enjoy working with adults just as much as I work with children,
Okay.
marriages, and adults. But what happened is I was looking around the biblical counseling field and just saying, where's there a need? Where are
Hmm.
there people not speaking to issues?
Right.
Because of my interest in child maltreatment issues and abuse issues, it
Yeah.
kind of led me into the world of child abuse and neglect, also into children's issues and just thinking really well about them.
Yeah.
So I think I came through to working with children and families and kids through some of the abuse issues because
Yeah.
that really captured my heart, probably, especially since we were a foster and adoptive family.
Hmm.
Thinking well about suffering, thinking well about things kids experience at young age and how to intervene and speak thoughtfully and biblically to those issues
Great.
became really important to me. And then it kind of led me into the world of kids and teens because so many people don't enjoy working with them or
Right.
fear working with them or struggle working with them that I thought, well, I like kids. I like
Yeah.
teenagers. I like working with families. I guess I'll pursue this to some
Yeah.
degree.
I love
And
it.
before I knew it, I was doing it more and more and writing about it and doing it naturally. So it
Yeah.
kind of morphed that way.
I love that. Now let's just go on that tangent for a second and let's speak to the counselor who may be afraid of counseling kids or teenagers. I had the privilege of starting a counseling center across town. We had 14 counselors there at this counseling center. We've had up to 11 counselors here. And I got to tell you, of all of those 25 plus counselors that we've worked with over the years, many of them are like, yeah, I don't think kids are for me. And I understand it can be intimidating, but some of them will say, I'm more afraid to work with a kid, or my prep time goes through the roof getting ready to work with a kid. Why do you think it is that we as biblical counselors sometimes struggle with the idea of working with a small soul, a little baby, a young person who might be just coming to faith or not yet even in the faith, yet under still their parents' provision and authority?
Yeah. Well, I can answer a couple of different ways, but my first thought is I think as adults, we struggle working with teenagers and children because we way too often rely on people's ability to meet us where we're at,
Yeah.
rather than our ability to meet them where they're at.
Yeah.
And that is, I think, um, this is a harsher way to say it, but a counseling failure on our part, that
Yeah.
we rely way too easily for people to somehow there be a mutual way of relating.
Yep.
When I think the skill in any counseling, in any ministry, is when we're willing to meet people where they are at and
Okay.
on the level they're at.
Yes.
Children and teens force that more than any population
Wow.
generally. But
Yep.
there are not exceptions to that. There's the elderly, there's
Hmm.
those who are psychiatric in nature.
Yeah.
There's all kinds of populations where for us to really reach them requires us to step outside of what's natural to us and step into somebody else's world.
Yeah.
I think children and teens require that in a really fundamental way
Yes.
that push us.
Yes.
And I say I counsel, I teach counseling children and adolescent course, and I often say to students that just because you can work with an adult does not mean you'll be effective in working with a child or
Right.
teen.
Right.
However, if you can learn to work with a child and teen, I think you'll become much more successful in working with a variety of different
Oh,
populations.
come on. That's good. Yeah, that's really good.
The other
Yeah, and
thing,
you're right. It's you have to go into their world. You talk about that in some of your writing, but yeah, continue. I don't want to interrupt you.
no, I was just going to comment. The other thing I think is hard, you talked about prep work, and you're
Yeah.
absolutely right that anytime you have a child or teen, and I think if you're really counseling well and counseling biblically, you're going to be involving parents. So now you're involving a child, you're involving parenting issues, you're involving more than
Yeah.
one person. And that's
That's
true of
true.
marriage counseling too, that I think that you work harder with two
Yeah.
people in the room. And so often children come with, I would hope they come with parents or loving adults or caretakers. They come
Yeah.
with siblings. They come with a host of other people that are playing into the counseling process, which I think does make you work harder.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good word. So multiple people, anytime we're working with multiple people, that's going to take more time. But I don't want to miss what you said. I think that's so profound. A key to good biblical counseling is that we have to enter into their world. And I do think a failure of counselors, no matter who we're counseling, is, hey, come into my world. Hey, I have this great thing to teach you. Hey, I have so much to convey. And really counseling, good biblical counseling and building involvement with a counselee is getting into their world. And no doubt working with teens and kids requires that. Now, one of the things you talked about in this book, this is a new book that was edited by Amy Baker. You contributed to it. I love this book. My wife and I have already been devouring it. But I got to be honest with you, when I first got it, I went to your chapter first, because, as I said, I'm a fan and I've learned a lot from you. But you have these charts in here where you've broken down the different stages, the 5 developmental stages of kids. And the reason I went there first is because I wanted to look up my kids. So I have 5 kids under 10. So I went to each stage to try to understand them. And I got to be honest, the first help to me was just understanding my son, who is 10, and just seeing some of the things that you had written in there that were really great. But one of the things you said is it's essential to become an expert at knowing the child in front of you. Now, that's true for me in parenting, but it's true also for us when we're counseling. So we can use different developmental stages. We can study these kids. But I like that from the beginning of your intro to the end of your intro before the chart, you said, hey, but you got to know the kid who's in front of you. That's most important. If you were to give us some tips on how to best get to know the counselee who's a teen or a kid in front of us, and obviously you have lots of writing on this, there's a lot we could talk about with that, but if you would just say high level, hey, this is how you get to know the kid in front of you the quickest and the best, what would you give us today?
You ask good questions and you listen well.
Yeah.
It's that simple. And good questions mean I want to know you. So I'm going to ask questions about you and your life and what you're interested in and the things that excite you, the things you're passionate about. So every child's going to be different. So I think it's understanding how they see the world around them.
Mm-hmm.
And the more you do that, the more it kind of comes natural to
Yeah.
ask questions and to listen really well. And kids pick up on that. It's amazing that they can tell when you're really in tuned and attentive to them and when you're really interested in what they have to say.
Yeah, that's good. That's really good. Now that brings me to this book that you wrote. This is I feel like I've been one of your biggest advertisers for this book. I've been buying it for parents as well as biblical counselors. We bought a bunch for our biblical counseling center here. This is the line I often say, Julie, with this book. I say this book should be like $150, but
Yeah.
it's not. It's a way underpriced for the value you get through it, because the stuff you have in here is so good. I mean, the introductory work to talk through play therapy and activities and how to get into their world is so key. But then you give us just so many resources to actually use in the counseling office with them. And I've made use of these with my kids. I've made use of these with some of my youngest counselees. But guess what? I've also made use of this with some of my oldest counselees.
Yeah.
So I said that yesterday in our counseling meeting. I said, everything she has in here, you probably could make age appropriate. But obviously your target was to help those who are counseling kids. Maybe I'll let you speak about this real quick. Give us your commercial on why you put this resource together. And then I have a question or two related to some of the content that's in here. But
Yeah.
just talk to us about this project. This is a profound project.
Oh, well, thank you. I was really excited about it. And for years, I teach a counseling course, and I would make all of the adult students, the counseling students, do these activities
Great.
every week, because I really deeply feel like you probably should not make a counselee do something you've not experienced yourself and seen the benefit or the downfalls of it, what works, what doesn't work. And so you would have grad students going through doing these activities, and they would talk about how they were surprised by the things that came out and the things that they would share that they never thought they would share. And that's really encouraging, because by the time you got to the end of the course, I don't presume everybody should work with kids and teens. It is really hard. And
Yeah.
but what was really neat is when I get to the end of a course and somebody would come up to me and go, I thought I was going to dread this class. And I don't know I'll ever work with kids and teens. I don't know I want to, but I feel like you've equipped me that if I ever did have a child or teen in front of me, I'd know what to do with them now.
Yeah.
And that was really neat to hear. And that was part of the goal, to say, we do need to be intentional. We do need to be thoughtful. The
Yeah.
issues kids and teens face are issues that many of us as adults face, but the way we reach them and the way we contextualize truth and the gospel to their lives
Yeah.
have to be very winsome and helpful. So even in building bridges in this book, on the back, the very back of the book, I have the developmental charts as well, just to give people an idea, because kids don't fall neatly into these categories, but it does give you an idea what to expect, what should they be capable of, and if they're not capable of it, does that help give me an indication of where there are strengths or weaknesses or disabilities or struggles in their life that are playing into these issues. But what I love about the book is just the practicalness of how to draw a child out, how to get them to speak, how to draw out their inner world in ways that that are enjoyable for them and make them feel loved and connected. And then also how to speak truth back in. I think we need to be a lot more winsome and wise and skillful at speaking truth into kids' lives in ways that they want to receive it.
Yeah, I love that. Your book does that. It does that extremely well. How do we get that wisdom in there? So you talk about that even in the introductory chapters of just, part of the point of all the play therapy or some of the activities in there is to get wisdom into their life. So I love that. I think one of the things the biblical counseling world is missing that you bring so well to it, besides an emphasis on children, is just the need to build involvement. I'm ACBC certified. I live in the ACBC world and talk a lot about biblical counseling, and we talk about the 6 key elements of biblical counseling, one of which is building involvement. And if I were to say there's one of the key elements I'm most passionate about, it's that one. But I also think it's one of the ones that we talk the least about. We assume it maybe more than we should. And building involvement, I think it does take a level of intuition and intentionality, and that your book gives some really good help with that. Later today, actually just in about an hour after we're together, I'll be leading a group on anxiety. It's a group of adults, but we're using the 6 circles and what are you feeling, and then the heart and the diagram of the person. And this is all adults, right? So we'll be using that. So I think there's great context for both of these, but I've used that same and that's those same exercises found there. I think it's like in page 95, somewhere around there. But I use those same exercises with my own kids at our kitchen table just to get some things out. So I think there's so much crossover, and the things that you have there are excellent. Maybe just talk for 1 second. I'm going to change us to parenting for a second here in a few minutes, but speak to the counselor, and this is still in the realm of involvement, but speak to the counselor that might be listening that is saying, okay, I'm going to have a child in here. I got to have my Bible. Of course, I got to teach them the Bible, but I'm adding other things to my Bible, my biblical counseling, if I'm using all of these different diagrams. Speak to them and help them understand why that's good. I mean, it helps with building involvement, but maybe I'll even say this too. I've done the tour of your office that was on the CCF website that you filmed in 2016. I mean, it's profound. Your office is kid oriented. You've gone above and beyond to make them feel safe. So maybe that's what I would like to hear you speak a little bit on, is building involvement, using other things in addition to the Bible, why that's okay in our counseling, and then what's the outcome of that? Why, the safety that the child may feel or things like that. I'd love for you just to speak to that for a moment. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah, you can keep honing me in because I'm sure I could go off on several
Sure.
different
Yeah.
rabbit trails here. But um, one of the words I use in the book is really it's creational in nature.
Mm-hmm.
So it almost feels like you're using something instead of the Bible. And I'd argue I'm using something to point them to the Bible.
Thank you. That's what I was
And
looking for. Yeah.
creation does that, right?
Yeah.
So sand trays, we make that very therapeutic, and it does have some philosophical and can go off on all kinds of directions in unhelpful ways. And I'd
Yeah.
argue, but there's something really fruitful about being at the ocean and sticking your hand and
Right.
your feet in the sand and staring at the vastness of the ocean that puts life back in perspective. There's horticultural therapy and
Mm.
plants and stuff that they turn into all kind of therapeutic models. And I say, that's just creation. That's just
Yeah.
creation pointing to something bigger than ourselves. You have the use of therapy dogs and animals. You have veterans who go kayaking out in the river and they are more at peace. There's something about creation that
Yeah. That's
points
so good.
to creator that orients us to where we fit into this world. And as Christians, we have the hope. So
Yeah.
here's where we should take these tools that the world tries to claim as something therapeutic, and we should say, no, these actually point back to a creator. And I feel like we build a better case
Yeah.
because it's truth,
Yeah.
because these things are what gives us hope, and they point us to somebody who makes sense out of our experience.
Mm. Julie,
So
that's so profound. Yeah. That's so
I
good.
argue these activities should always point us back to our creator. They point
Yeah.
us to what's true and good and right.
Yeah. That's good. That's good. But there is the ditch where people could say, well, you're just falling into adding and adding and adding or replacing. And I want the listener that's listening to this interview to hear, hey, listen, those things, like Julie said, are helping us pull them towards the Bible or building involvement as we get to the scriptures. It's not in replacement of it. And I
Right.
love the idea of looking at it through the creation lens. It's beautiful. That's good. Well, thank you. And thank you again for this book. I mean, it's already been a huge help in my life, and I'll continue to use it. Anyone that's listening, I want to encourage you to get a copy of this. It's called Building Bridges by Julie Lowe. It's an incredible, incredible resource, and great endorsements, by the way, on the back. Some of the best in the world: Paul David Tripp, Ed Welsh, C.W. Solomon. I mean, these guys are some of the best, and they're standing with you in this series and on this book. So thank you for putting that out for us. Let's talk a little bit about parenting for a second. And I'm going to be honest, I'm going to be selfish with the last few minutes of our interview because I'm a parent. I want to be intentional with the kids. And how, as I was preparing for our time, I thought, what do I want to hear her speak the most about? So I want to start with entitlement, and I'm going to build it off of your CCF, your address, the plenary talk you did at the conference. I listened to that. It was great. You did a great job as you walked us through what does it mean for us to be a holy priesthood. And then obviously had a breakout session on parenting in light of that. But you said something in there. You had many great illustrations and points. You weren't speaking just to counseling kids, but you were speaking to all of us as far as what we are in Christ, a royal priesthood, a holy nation. But you said this one statement you used, I think it was Burger King and McDonald's, of we live in a culture that's have it your way or you deserve a treat today. And that's for sure true about our kids, right? I mean, our kids live in just this entitled world. And I would love to hear you speak to me as a parent, or any parent who may be listening who realize that they're raising a child in an entitled world, but we're trying to point them towards Christ and direct them to believe that all they need is Christ, right? But the world tells them something so different, so individualistic and focused on them. Could you speak to that a little bit? What would you say to the parent that's raising a child in an entitled world? How can we better focus them on Christ and develop grateful hearts in them?
Yeah. Yeah, I worry about that for my own kids. I think we all are fighting an uphill battle against this mentality of entitlement. And you see it so much with electronics and what
Yeah,
kids think I should be given this at a certain age,
right.
or all of my peers have this. So where you see it most happens to be with rights and responsibilities.
Yeah,
And electronics is the big one, the cell phone. I'm entitled, I deserve this. And or how dare you take this away? This is like
yeah.
it's a child right to have a cell phone.
Right. Yeah.
And I've heard teenagers say such things.
Yes. Yeah.
Or when kids turn 18, well, I'm an adult, as if that absolves them from any moral responsibility or relational responsibility in life.
Yeah.
So we talk at length with our kids about maturity means responsibility. It means a higher level of accountability on your part,
Okay.
responsibility,
Yeah.
and ability, willingness to enter into relationship and value relationships. And then we also have to push them by teaching them to serve, that it's not, the world doesn't serve you. We are called to go out and serve others. And so a huge way of battling entitlement as a family is by getting our kids involved in serving.
That's good.
Nothing they gain from it. They don't get money for it. They don't get anything but maybe some gratitude. And we're raising kids that don't serve anymore. They don't go to soup kitchens or rake people's yards or just
Yeah.
go help clean a house for an elderly person. And I think we're doing a disservice. I think that feeds this entitlement that the world revolves around my Xbox game or my
Yeah.
world or my ability to engage with my peers.
Yeah.
So I could probably go on for 20 more minutes
I
with
love
us.
that. Yeah, that's good. And we're trying with our kids. I mean, we have our kids serving on Sundays in our guest services, and they've actually really owned it. I mean, it's funny. They'll get up super early. I get up early before preaching, and it's funny how many times they've gotten up early as well and just said, "Dad, today I get to go serve." And so we're developing that in them. But I'm trying to figure out how do we continue to point their hearts towards gratefulness. We use a statement in our house. It's from an old Puritan who was served nothing but a piece of toast by his wife. And he sat down at the table and he saw the piece of toast and he said, "All of this and Jesus Christ too." And I
Right.
love, and I'm using that with our kids. So whenever they start complaining, I say, "All of this and Jesus Christ too."
I will have to borrow that. That's a good
Yeah, I want them to learn that we have that, but it's not easy, and it's an uphill battle with helping our kids have grateful hearts. Maybe we'll change a little bit towards discipline. Thank you for that advice. That's a good word. To discipline. One of the crossroads that we're at is now we have a 10-year-old, which I know you have as well, and then some who have gone past the elementary age. We're trying to figure out how do we change, how does discipline change as our kids grow older? And I'd love for you just to speak to that a little bit. I have a 2-year-old, right? I think I understand how to discipline him pretty well, but I got to tell you, as they get older, the more complex it's getting, the discipline, and it doesn't seem like all discipline works equally on all kids. So if you could speak a little bit about discipline and what you'd say to parents on that topic.
Yeah, so I tend to think, what are the biblical principles? Because I don't think there's a formula. You said it, that kids respond differently to different kinds of discipline, and some could feel overbearing, and some could feel like it makes no difference at all.
Yeah.
And I got to be really careful that I'm not focused on the outcome. I'm more focused on faithfulness to the task. So how
Okay.
is that calling me to discipline this child in front of me? If my outcome is I'm going to make them sorry, or I'm going to make them pay, or I'm going to make them be repentant,
Right.
then we resort to all kinds of awful ways of disciplining or responding to their behavior,
Yeah.
rather than saying, Lord, what do I know to be true about my son or daughter?
Mm-hmm.
And what softens their heart, what helps them to be more open.
Mm.
And I realize with our 5 kids, they all respond very differently to discipline. And I would love to be just a casual, sit at my feet and let me win you to my ways. But then the Lord gives me children that don't at all want to sit at my feet and be won
Right.
over by my wise counsel. They
Sure. Yeah.
they need they need to know here's the consequence. That good choices have good consequences, bad choices have bad consequences. And some of my kids, I can sit and I can talk it through with them,
Yeah.
um, and I can appeal to their heart and they're convicted.
Yeah.
Others need immediate consequence, and then maybe later on they're receptive. Or
Mm.
if I try to have a conversation with them, they think it's now a debate that they can win. And
Totally.
so
Yes.
conversing with them is not an option.
That
Where I
is my son right there.
fun.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think the wisdom is saying, what are the biblical principles? They're what's consistent, what
Okay.
is wise, what is loving, um, and what points them to good character
Yeah.
and good choices. And that means that I have a whole plethora of ways I can respond to discipline, but I keep asking myself, am I being consistent? Am I being loving? Am I being wise?
Yeah.
Um, am I putting their needs before my own or my own frustrations? And when I do that, then it opens the door for me to have a lot of variety of ways in disciplining them. Sometimes it has to do with development, but a lot of times what you see is it has to do with their receptivity. What do they
You're
respond
right.
to best?
Yeah, you're right. Okay, so I want to jump off of that now to the gospel. That's helpful for discipline, but let's talk about the gospel, their age of receptivity for the gospel. I mean, we want our kids to come to know Christ. I've been praying that since they were in the womb. I want each and every one of my kids to know Christ. 2 have professed Christ so far, which is exciting. I think my 6-year-old's on path. She said, Dad, I think I'm getting ready to put my faith in Jesus. That's what she said recently. So we're getting there. It's exciting. But I want to end our time talking about advice for either a biblical counselor or a parent. How do we help our children see the gospel most clearly? I said on stage this last Sunday to our church, I said, we're not in this to make our children better moral beings. We're not in this to make little Republicans. We're not in this to make you fill in the blank, whatever your preference is. We're in this to make Christ followers, and we're discipling in our own home. If you'll speak to the biblical counselor or the parent about directing a child towards the gospel and maybe give us some things to hang our hat on there, that would be helpful.
Yeah. Language I use a lot. Language I use a lot is, how do I woo my kids to Christ? How do I
Yeah.
woo them to the truth? And I think that in counseling too, that I want to surprise kids, especially kids that grow up in Christian homes, inadvertently, somehow they think it's all about do's and don'ts and
Yeah.
outward behavior. And so I am always thinking, how can I show my own kids, I want you to love the Lord? And then everything flows from that. If you love somebody, then you want to please them. Then you
Yeah.
want to do things that delight them. Then there's a change in behavior, because I come home and I think, how can I make my husband happy today? Or how can I make
Yeah.
my kids happy? When I love the Lord, then I approach life going, how can I please him? How can I make him happy? That's far different than, here's what God says about sex and sexuality. Here's what God says about drugs. Here's what God says about this.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but when I model love and delighting in a personal, intimate relationship with the Lord, then our behavior pours forth from that and
Yeah.
informs the way our kids live their life. And that's what I want them to see.
That's
Um,
great.
yeah, that's the way I want to talk about the gospel
Yeah.
to them.
Wooing them to Christ. I love that. Yeah. I grew up in a homeschool culture quite a bit. I was homeschooled from 4th grade to 10th grade. My wife was homeschooled the whole way through. It's funny how there is a Christian culture. I'm not just saying it's the homeschool culture, but I think there's a Christian culture that can be exasperated sometimes in the homeschool culture of more about teaching regimented discipline, disciplining correctly. And I think we can fall into a pit of not wooing them, but rather um, guiding too firmly, right? And we're finding several, even adult counselees coming into our counseling center who grew up in Christian homes, like you said, but they're far from Christ. They know that that's the truth, but something went off the rails with how the gospel was portrayed in their household. Have you seen that?
Yeah, it becomes formulaic. So we
Yeah,
see in other people really good ways of them structuring their home or schedules, and we say, ah, that works. That must be the
yeah, yeah,
Christian way. And we turn great ideas into formulas rather than saying there's a lot of liberty, there's wisdom,
yeah,
being an expert at knowing our own family, our own home, how they're wired, and giving grace to say, maybe you're not a night person, maybe you're not a
Yeah.
morning person, maybe you're this, but can you love the Lord and be faithful to what you're doing? And I I could lose hope if my focus was always the behavior of my children.
Yeah.
And here I am, a counselor. I'm an expert in the field, and what's going on with my own kids? Well, they're moral responders. They're going to choose who they
Yeah.
serve, and my focus can't be the outcome, though I care about the outcome. My focus has to be faithfulness to the task. That Lord, help me to be faithful to loving and parenting them to the best of my ability, and then Lord, you're responsible for their outcome. They're responsible for their outcome.
That's good, Julie. That is so good. Thank you. Thank you. This has been great to be with you. I have enjoyed this conversation so immensely. Are there any closing words or things you think we haven't covered today you'd love to impart to those who may be listening, be it a parent or a biblical counselor?
Yeah, well, one thing I always want to end with parents is it doesn't matter how old your kids are or how much they're struggling or how much you think you did it wrong. Like the Lord is gracious and it's
Mhm.
never too late to start. And anytime you tell your kids, I love you, I want a better relationship with you, you will grow as a
That's
parent.
awesome.
So I always like ending with saying it's never too late. Don't grow weary in doing good.
That's good. Thank you. Thank you very much. There are so many great resources that you're putting out. I've mentioned only two today. Obviously, the Building Bridges one is one that I recommend everybody gets a copy of. But there are many other resources, including articles that you have over at CCF. I've read them. One of my favorite articles, Julie, that you put out recently was about the pandemic. It was about how we can draw close to our kids during the pandemic. So thank you for that resource. And I recommend that for anyone who's living in these current times. I mean, it's crazy times, but it is an opportunity to draw close. If people want to get more from you, from your teaching or from your writing, where should they go? Is CCF the best place, or would you point them somewhere else?
Yep, CCF is the best place, www.ccf.org. And also New Growth, they have the two books I put out, Childproof,
Yes,
about parenting, and then Building Bridges.
that's great. Good. Well, thank you. Thanks again for being with us. For more information, check out ccf.org and hopefully grab some of these books. I hope they are a great encouragement to you. Thanks for joining us. Thanks, Julie. We'll talk to you again soon.
Thank you.